Hello, all you brave souls, and welcome back to Horror Stories, the channel where we prove that the most terrifying things are often heard, not seen. We have a truly unsettling story for you tonight, one that explores the nature of silence itself. What if silence wasn't an absence of sound, but a presence? What if it was heavy, suffocating, and worst of all, what if it was listening? Tonight, we present a story called The Silent Choir. We meet Ethan Hayes, a brilliant audio forensic analyst trying to escape his past. Seeking anonymity, he moves into a historic basement apartment in Savannah, only to find himself confronted by a silence so absolute, so possessive, it feels like a living entity. As a man who built his career on the science of sound, he knows that true silence is a myth. But in this new home, the quiet is different. It's a hungry void, waiting to be filled. Soon, the silence is broken by sounds that defy logic, a low resonant hum that vibrates in his very bones, and faint guttural chanting that seems to bleed through the solid brick wall he shares with a disconcertingly pleasant new neighbor. When Ethan tries to capture this impossible audio, his high-end equipment records nothing but static. He is a professional listener, a man of data and evidence, trapped in a place where his own senses are being turned against him, becoming conduits for a terror he can't prove and can't escape. If you're ready to find out what secrets are hiding in the quiet, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Horror Stories, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a descent into darkness. Now, turn down the lights and listen closely. The first thing Ethan Hayes noticed about his new apartment was the silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a thick, heavy quiet that seemed to press in on him, muffling the world outside. For an audio forensic analyst, even a disgraced one, silence was never truly empty. It was a canvas, and on it, the ghost notes of existence were always faintly audible: the hum of a refrigerator, the sigh of plumbing, the distant drone of traffic. But here, in this long, narrow apartment on Savannah's Jones Street, the silence felt possessive. It felt like it was listening. He dropped a cardboard box labeled kitchen crap onto the heart pine floor. The sound was disappointingly dull, absorbed by the oppressive quiet. The apartment was a garden level, a realtor's euphemism for a basement that had been given ideas above its station. A single wall of exposed, time-darkened brick ran the entire length of the space, a feature the landlord had called rustic and historic. To Ethan, it looked like a wound. The mortar was crumbling in places, and the bricks themselves, a strange deep crimson, seemed to soak up the light from the tall barred windows that looked out onto a patch of overgrown ferns. He'd taken the place sight unseen, a desperate move fueled by 3 months of couch surfing and the dwindling severance package from the firm. Savannah was supposed to be a reset. A place where no one knew about the Morrison case, about the little girl, about the sound analysis that had been technically perfect and morally catastrophic. He was here to lie low, take on some freelance transcription work, and try to forget the sound of his own name being spat like a curse on cable news.
A sharp, précise knock échouait from the front door.
3 raps, perfectly spaced. Not the casual drumming of a delivery person. Ethan froze. He wasn't expecting anyone. He walked to the door, his socked feet silent on the cool floorboards, and peered through the peephole. The man on his stoop was impeccably dressed in a linen suit the color of old bone. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a high forehead. His face was all sharp angles and pleasant lines, but his eyes were disconcerting. They were a pale, washed-out blue, and they stared directly into the peephole as if he knew Ethan was there watching. He held a small potted orchid, its petals a startling shade of purple. Ethan opened the door a few inches, the safety chain still engaged. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, a slow, deliberate expression that didn't quite reach his pale eyes. "Forgive the intrusion. I am Julian Croft. I live next door." He gestured with his head toward the identical townhouse adjoined to Ethan's by the long brick wall. "I saw the moving van earlier and thought I would welcome you to the neighborhood." He proffered the orchid, a small housewarming gift. "Oh, thanks." Ethan fumbled with the chain, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He didn't want neighbors. He didn't want pleasantries. He wanted to be a ghost. He took the orchid. The ceramic pot was cold. Ethan Hayes. "A pleasure, Ethan Hayes," Julian said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. It was a voice made for radio, or for lulling people into a false sense of security. "I do hope you'll be happy here. This old house has character." He said the word character as if it were a euphemism for something else entirely. His gaze flickered past Ethan, into the dim apartment, lingering for a moment on the exposed brick wall. A very unique structure. The acoustics are quite intimate.
The word choice sans appris que leur souhait daoun est an espine.
Intimate. Right. Well, thanks for the plant. He started to close the door. "If you need anything," Julian said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more confidential, "anything at all. Or if you should hear any unusual noises, please don't hesitate to let me know. Old buildings settle in the most peculiar ways." The smile was still there, but it felt like a mask now, stretched thin over something cold and patient. Ethan just nodded, mumbled another thanks, and shut the door, sliding the deadbolt home with a decisive click. He leaned against the wood, his heart hammering. He told himself he was overreacting. He was jumpy, stressed. The man was just a friendly, slightly eccentric neighbor. The kind of character you expected in a place like Savannah. He placed the orchid on the windowsill. Its vibrant purple felt alien in the gloom of the apartment. He went back to unpacking, trying to fill the oppressive silence with the mundane sounds of a new life starting. He set up his workstation in the back room, which would serve as his office and bedroom. 2 monitors, a high-end DAC, and his prized collection of noise-isolating headphones. This was his sanctuary within the sanctuary. Here, he could control the sound. He could filter, enhance, and delete. He could make the world make sense. That night, after a meager dinner of takeout pizza eaten on the floor, he lay on an air mattress, the unfamiliar city sounds filtering through the windows. The clop of a horse-drawn carriage, the distant laughter of tourists on River Street, the mournful horn of a ship on the river. He was just starting to drift off when he heard it. It came from the wall. The long, brick wall he shared with Julian Croft. It wasn't a settling noise. It wasn't plumbing. Ethan's entire career was built on identifying and categorizing sound. This was different. It was a low, rhythmic vibration. A hum, so deep it was more felt than heard, a resonant frequency that seemed to thrum in his bones. It was almost subaudible, the kind of sound that could drive a person mad without them ever knowing why. He sat up, straining to hear. The humming continued for a full minute, a steady pulsing drone, and then it stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence that rushed back in to fill the void was somehow heavier, more menacing than before. He lay awake for hours, his ears straining against the quiet, his mind replaying Julian's words. The acoustics are quite intimate. The next day, Ethan tried to rationalize it. An old generator. A faulty HVAC unit. He was a man of science and data, not gothic fantasies. He threw himself into work, transcribing a garbled deposition for a law firm in Atlanta. He put on his headphones, the Sennheiser HD 800S, cans so precise they could pick out a fly's wingbeat in a concert hall. He lost himself in the work, cleaning up the audio, isolating the speaker's voice from the background noise, making order out of chaos. Late in the afternoon, he took a break, his ears ringing from hours of focused listening. He walked into the main room and froze. The orchid was no longer on the windowsill. It was now sitting in the exact center of the small dining table he had assembled that morning. He stared at it, his blood turning to ice. He lived alone. He had locked the door. He had been in the back room all day with noise-isolating headphones on. No one could have come in. It was impossible. He walked slowly around the table. There was no sign of entry. The windows were still locked from the inside. The front door was still deadbolt. He backed away from the table, his gaze darting around the room, which now felt alien and hostile. Had he moved it? Could he have done it this morning and forgotten? No. He distinctly remembered placing it on the sill, thinking how its garish color clashed with the muted tones of the room. His memory was a fortress, built of case files and audio timestamps. He did not forget things like this. A cold dread began to seep into him. He walked to the long brick wall and pressed his ear against the cool, rough surface. He heard nothing but the faint, frantic thumping of his own blood. He stayed there for a long time, listening to the silence, which no longer felt empty, but watchful. Waiting. That night, the humming returned. It was the same low, rhythmic frequency, but this time, it was accompanied by something else. A new sound, woven into the drone. It was faint, a mere whisper of a sound, but his trained ears caught it instantly. It was the sound of chanting. It wasn't in English. The language was guttural, filled with hard stops and sibilant hisses. It was a chorus of voices, perfectly synchronized, rising and falling in a steady, hypnotic cadence. The sound seemed to emanate not from a single point, but from the entire length of the wall, as if the bricks themselves were singing this terrible alien hymn. Ethan scrambled off the air mattress, backing away until his shoulders hit the opposite wall. His breath hitched in his chest. This wasn't faulty plumbing. This wasn't an old generator. He was listening to a ritual. He grabbed his phone, his fingers slick with sweat, and hit record, holding it up towards the wall. He had to document it. Data. He needed data. The chanting continued for nearly 10 minutes. 10 minutes of Ethan standing frozen in his new apartment, listening to a chorus of ghosts or madmen through a solid brick wall. Then, just as before, it all stopped at once. The silence crashed down on him like a physical blow. He played back the recording. Nothing. Only the low hiss of digital silence. He boosted the gain, ran it through a noise reduction filter. Still nothing. It was as if the sounds had only ever existed in his head. He didn't sleep at all that night. He sat in a chair, facing the wall, his largest kitchen knife in his lap, listening. But the silence remained absolute. The following morning, hollow-eyed and frayed, he saw Julian Croft leaving his townhouse. Julian was dressed in another immaculate suit, this one a dark charcoal gray. He paused on the sidewalk, adjusted his tie, and then turned his head, his pale blue eyes finding Ethan's window instantly. He smiled that slow, deliberate smile and gave a small, courteous nod before walking away. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement, an affirmation. "Yes," the smile said. "I know you heard us." Ethan felt a surge of desperate anger. This couldn't be happening. He wasn't going to be driven out of his own home, his own mind, by some creepy hymn-singing landlord's pet. He was a man of evidence. He needed proof. He spent the day researching. Not ghosts, not occult rituals, but building codes. Sound ordinances. Tenant rights. He was going to fight this with bureaucracy. He found the number for the Savannah Historic Preservation Department and called, his voice tight with manufactured indignation. "Yes, I'd like to inquire about the soundproofing regulations for shared walls in Category 2 historic townhouses," he began, the technical jargon a comforting shield. The woman who answered was patient, with a warm, syrupy accent. "Well, that's a mighty specific question, sugar. What seems to be the trouble?" "My neighbor," Ethan said, lowering his voice. "He's generating an unreasonable amount of noise. Rhythmic humming. Chanting." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Chanting," she repeated, a note of amusement in her voice. "Yes. It's unacceptable. This is a historic property, and I'm certain the lack of proper insulation is in violation of city code." "Sir," the woman interrupted gently, "are you in the townhouse on Jones, the one with the dark red brick?" Ethan's blood ran cold. "Yes. How did you know?" We get a call about that property every few years, whenever a new tenant moves in. The building is grandfathered in under the original 1966 ordinance. The walls are what they are. There's no code violation. She paused, and her voice softened.
Honnête, a word of advice?
Some houses in this town, they just have old bones. They make noises. You'll get used to it. This isn't old bones, Ethan snapped, his control fraying. This is deliberate. If you believe your neighbor is being a nuisance, your recourse is with the police department, not us. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Ethan hung up, his hand trembling. He felt trapped. The law couldn't help him. The very history of the city was being used as a shield for this violation. He was alone. He looked at the long brick wall, which seemed to loom larger in the dim light, a monolithic tombstone separating his world from Julian's. He was a professional listener, a man who made his living from sound, and his own ears were turning against him, becoming conduits for a terror he couldn't prove and couldn't escape. He had to know more. Not about ordinances, but about the house itself, about the wall. He looked up the number for the Georgia Historical Society. He needed an expert. Someone who dealt in facts, in history, in things that could be documented and verified. A crisp, professional voice answered.
Historical Society Archive, Docteur.
Thorne speaking. Yes, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. My name is Ethan Hayes. I need some help researching the history of a property. A townhouse on Jones Street. There was a moment of silence. He could hear the faint click of a keyboard. Which number on Jones? Dr. Thorne asked, her voice now holding a new, sharper note of interest. Ethan told her. He heard her take a short, sharp breath. That house, she said, her voice low and serious. That house has a file. That night, the humming came again, but it had changed. It was deeper, the frequency lower, resonating in his teeth and jaw, and with it came a new sound. It wasn't chanting. It was a single, soft, female voice, and it was whispering his name. Ethan. The voice was coming from the wall, from the bricks themselves. It was right next to his head. He lurched back, scrambling away, his breath catching in a sob. The whisper followed him, a sibilant, dry sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. Ethan, we're so glad you came. We've been waiting. He clapped his hands over his ears, but it was useless. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside his head now, a vibration in his skull. The voice was intimate, invasive. It was the sound of a secret being told just to him. He looked at the orchid on his table. In the pale moonlight filtering through the barred windows, one of its vibrant purple petals had turned a sickly necrotic black. The silence that followed the whisper was the worst part. It was a hungry, expectant silence. It knew it had him, and it was waiting for him to break. The next morning, Ethan found himself standing across the street from the Georgia Historical Society, a massive neoclassical building that looked more like a temple than an archive. He hadn't slept, and the Savannah morning, thick with humidity and the sweet, cloying scent of Confederate jasmine, felt like a fever dream. The world seemed too bright, the sounds too sharp. Every tourist's laugh, every car engine, was an assault. He clutched the strap of his messenger bag, which contained a portable recorder and a notebook, pathetic talismans against the encroaching madness. He felt a deep, professional shame. He was a man who dissected reality into waveforms and spectrograms. Now he was chasing ghosts because of weird noises and a possibly misplaced plant. He was about to turn and walk away when he remembered the whisper. Ethan. The memory of it, a physical vibration in his skull, propelled him up the stone steps and through the heavy oak doors. The inside was cool and quiet, smelling of old paper and lemon polish. A stark contrast to the thick, listening silence of his apartment. Behind a large reference desk sat a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that somehow failed to contain a few rebellious curls. She wore half-moon glasses perched on her nose and was frowning at a document with intense concentration. She looked up as he approached. "Can I help you?" Her voice was the same crisp, no-nonsense tone he'd heard on the phone. "Dr. Eris Thorne. I'm Ethan Hayes. I called yesterday about the house on Jones Street." Her expression shifted. The professional mask softened with a flicker of curiosity. She took off her glasses. "Ah, yes. Mr. Hayes. The chanting neighbor." She didn't say it mockingly, but with a historian's precision. "Please have a seat." She gestured to a chair beside the desk.
Il pulled the fil.
She slid a thick beige folder across the polished wood. The label, written in faded ink, read, 112 Jones Street Property and Incident Log. His address. A whole file. Ethan asked, his voice hoarse. "This is Savannah," Eris said with a wry smile. "Most houses that have been standing for more than 200 years have a file. It's usually just deeds, tax records, architectural surveys. This one." She trailed off, tapping a manicured finger on the folder. "This one is different." Ethan opened it. The first few pages were what she described: brittle property transfers from the 19th century, records of sale, a survey from 1922 noting significant structural integrity of interior partition wall. But then came the other documents, clipped together with rusted paper clips. They were newspaper articles from the Savannah Morning News, dated from the 1930s to the present day. The headlines were chillingly similar. 1934, widow leaps from window on Jones Street. Neighbors reported nightly disturbances. 1957, prominent doctor found dead in study. Suicide note mentions the whispering wall. 1981, graduate student suffers complete mental breakdown. Claims the silence is too loud. Ethan's hands grew cold as he read. Each article detailed a tragedy centered on his apartment, or the one next door. The accounts from neighbors and police reports were eerily consistent. Complaints of strange noises, tenants becoming reclusive and paranoid, and a final tragic end. The graduate student, a musicology major from SCAD, had been found in a catatonic state, having clawed the plaster off his side of the shared wall, his fingernails worn down to the quick. He'd told paramedics he was trying to let the sound out. "My God," Ethan whispered, looking up at Eris. Her face was grim. "It gets stranger," she said. She reached into the folder and pulled out a separate, smaller envelope. "These aren't part of the official record. They were tucked into the back of the file, left by a former archivist, I think. They're patient intake notes from the old Telfair Asylum." She handed him a few photostat pages. The notes were for a woman named Eleanor Vance, admitted in 1934. She was the widow from the first newspaper clipping. The report was written in a physician's spidery script. Patient exhibits extreme paranoia, centered on her neighbor. Claims he sings to the walls at night. Describes a low hum that shakes the teeth, and voices that know her name. She speaks of a silent choir, and a man who wants to use her sadness as a key. She has packed cotton and wax into her ears so tightly that it has caused severe infection. Patient is non-responsive to conventional therapies. Prognosis is poor. Ethan stared at the words silent choir. It felt like a physical punch. It was a confirmation, a piece of solid data in a sea of terrifying ambiguity. This wasn't new. This wasn't just him. It was a pattern, a system. "Julian Croft," Ethan said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Does the file say anything about him?" Eris shook her head, leaning forward. "That's the strangest part. I ran the name through every database I have. Property records, census data, business licenses. As far as the official records of Savannah are concerned, Julian Croft doesn't exist. The deed for 114 Jones, the apartment next to yours, is held by a trust. A blind trust with a name that sounds more like a poem than a legal entity, the Hesychia Foundation. Hesychia. It's Greek, Eris said, pushing her glasses up her nose. It means stillness, quiet, rest. It's a term used in an old Eastern Orthodox mystical tradition of prayer, seeking to achieve divine quiet. A silent choir seeking divine quiet. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture more horrifying than he could have imagined. Julian wasn't just a nuisance neighbor. He was the conductor of this madness, a ghost in the city's records, carrying on a tradition of psychological torture that spanned nearly a century. What is he doing in there? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. What does he want? I don't know, Eris admitted. But that wall, the survey from 22 mentioned its unique structure, and the musicology student who clawed at it. Maybe the goal isn't just to harass the tenants. Maybe it's about the house itself. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline, cutting through the exhaustion. This was a puzzle. A dark, terrifying puzzle, but a puzzle nonetheless. And he was good at puzzles. That wall, he said, thinking aloud. Julian said the acoustics were intimate. The bricks are a strange color. The sound seems to come from everywhere at once. It's a resonator. A giant, architectural tuning fork. Eris looked at him, her skepticism warring with the evidence in front of them. A tuning fork for what? I don't know, but I have the equipment to find out. He stood up, a new desperate resolve hardening in his gut. Thank you, Dr. Thorne. Eris, you've given me more than you know. Be careful, Mr. Hayes, she called after him as he walked away. History in this town has a way of repeating itself. He barely heard her. His mind was already racing. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was an analyst. This was a signal, and he was going to capture it, dissect it, and expose it. He spent the afternoon at an electronics store, buying sensitive contact microphones and a broad-spectrum frequency analyzer. He was going to turn his apartment into a listening post. He would turn their weapon back on them. Back in his apartment, the oppressive silence felt different now. It wasn't just menacing, it was charged. Expectant. He ignored the orchid on the table, which now had a second blackened petal. He worked with a feverish intensity, running cables, attaching the contact mics to the brick wall at carefully spaced intervals. He calibrated the analyzer, routing all the inputs to his main console. He would see the sound. He would map its shape, find its source. As dusk fell, painting the room in shades of orange and bruised purple, he sat at his workstation, put on his headphones, and waited. The air grew thick and still. The world outside seemed to fade away. It was just him, the wall, and the silence. At 11:17 p.m., it began. The hum started first, visible on his screen as a clean, impossibly low sine wave at 33 Hz, the so-called ghost frequency that neurologists theorized could induce feelings of anxiety and dread. It was a pure, unwavering tone. Then the chanting started, layered on top of it. On his analyzer, it was chaos. A dozen overlapping waveforms, a complex, discordant mess. It was the sound of a nightmare given form. Then, the whisper came. Ethan. He saw it on the screen. A sharp, narrow spike in the high-frequency range, completely distinct from the chanting. It was a real, physical sound wave. He wasn't imagining it. He hit record, his entire body trembling. And as he watched the waveforms dance, another sound emerged from the wall, one he hadn't heard before. It was the sound of scraping. A slow, rhythmic shhh, like something being methodically dragged across a stone floor. He ripped his headphones off, his heart pounding against his ribs. The sound was louder now, audible even without the equipment. It was coming from one specific spot on the wall, directly in front of him. A slow, deliberate scraping. from the other side. He stared at the spot, his breath held tight in his chest. A thin gray powder began to trickle from a crack in the mortar, dusting the floorboard below. He crept closer. The scraping sound was right there, just inches from his face, on the other side of the brick. Someone was deliberately, patiently, grinding away at the wall from Julian's side, thinning it. Then, the scraping stopped. The chanting stopped. The humming stopped. Total, absolute silence. He stood frozen, staring at the little pile of mortar dust on his floor. A tiny breach. A new line crossed. He looked at his monitors. The recording was saved. He had it. He had the proof. A wave of triumphant, hysterical relief washed over him. He turned from the wall, and his triumph died in his throat. Standing by the dining table, bathed in the cold blue light of the monitor screens, was Julian Croft. He wasn't breathing heavily. His immaculate suit was unruffled. He held the pot with the orchid in one hand. All its petals were now a dead, brittle black. He looked at Ethan, and for the first time, the pleasant mask was gone. His face was a blank canvas of cold, ancient patience. "The overture is over, Mr. Hayes," Julian said, his voice the calm, quiet center of the storm. "I had hoped you would simply leave. But since you are so determined to listen, it's time you joined the choir." He took a slow step forward. Ethan scrambled back, his mind screaming. The door was locked. The windows were barred. He was trapped. How had he gotten in? It didn't matter. He was here. He was inside. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a perfect, predatory silence, and it was wearing Julian Croft's face. Part 2, The Encroachment. Ethan's mind fractured for a second. The logical part, the analyst, screamed that this was impossible. The door was deadbolt, the chain was on, the windows were barred. The primal part, the cornered animal, simply screamed. He snatched the heaviest thing he could reach, a thick textbook on acoustic physics, and hurled it at Julian. The book flew through the space where Julian's head should have been and smashed into the wall behind him with a sickening thud. Julian hadn't dodged. He hadn't even flinched. He simply wasn't solid. For a heartbeat, his form wavered, becoming a shimmering heat-haze distortion in the air, before coalescing back into the sharp-suited, silver-haired man holding the dead orchid. "Crude," Julian murmured, his voice echoing slightly, as if coming from a great distance. "Sound is a wave. Light is a wave. All matter, at its most fundamental level, is merely a vibration. We are all just songs being sung. Some of us have simply learned to change the tune." He took another step. Ethan scrambled backward, crab-walking over cables and equipment, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his chest. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers refusing to obey. 911. He had to call 911. What would he say? "There's a ghost, no, a man who isn't solid, in my apartment, and he's talking philosophy at me." They'd send a van with soft walls for him, not a car with flashing lights for Julian.
Julian stopped beside the workstation.
His pale eyes scanned the complex array of monitors and analyzers. He showed no surprise, only a kind of detached, academic interest. "Impressive," he said, his gaze settling on the complex waveform of the chant still frozen on the screen. "You have very good ears, Ethan.
You hear the note bene at the noise.
That is why this location chose you. Or rather, allowed you to be chosen." "Get out of my house," Ethan snarled, finding a sliver of anger to anchor himself in the swirling sea of terror. "House." Julian gave a soft, dry chuckle. "This isn't a house. It is a resonator, an antenna, a church. And you are mistaken if you think it is yours." He tilted his head, a gesture of mock pity.
You are the offering.
He raised the pot with the withered orchid. With a slow, deliberate motion, he turned it upside down. A cascade of dry black soil and dead roots spilled onto Ethan's mixing console, dusting the sensitive faders and knobs with filth. The soul requires tilling, Julian said softly. Fear, despair, isolation. These are the nutrients that enrich the soil. Your predecessor, the music student, his was a garden of exquisite terror. But you are a connoisseur of sound. Your terror will have a unique timbre, a resonance we have not heard in a very long time. And then he was gone. He didn't walk out the door. He didn't fade away. He simply ceased to be there. One moment he was standing by the console, a figure of immaculate menace. The next, there was only empty space and the pile of black dirt on Ethan's equipment. The oppressive, watchful silence rushed back in, thicker than ever. Ethan didn't move for a full minute. He just stared at the spot, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Then, a shudder racked his entire body and he lurched into motion. He ran to the front door. The deadbolt was still thrown. The chain was still engaged. He checked the windows, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the latches. All locked from the inside. He was losing his mind. That had to be it. PTSD. A psychotic break triggered by stress. He was hallucinating. The man, the non-solid form, the book passing through him, it was a textbook symptom of something. He wasn't an analyst of minds, only of sound. But the dirt was real. He stared at the black, greasy soil coating his expensive console. It was tangible, physical proof. He could smell its loamy, grave-like scent. He cautiously touched it. It was cold, unnaturally so. He scooped some into a plastic baggie, his forensic instincts kicking in on autopilot. Evidence. Always collect the evidence. He spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of his bedroom, the kitchen knife clutched in his hand, a heavy chair wedged under the doorknob. But no more sounds came from the wall. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a predator that has shown its teeth and is now content to wait. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old building was Julian's footstep. Every shadow in the corner of his eye was Julian's wavering form. He felt a creeping paranoia that was terrifyingly familiar. He was experiencing the exact symptoms described in the asylum notes of Eleanor Vance. He sings to the walls. He wants to use her sadness as a key. The next day, Ethan called Eris Thorne. His voice was a strained, shaky whisper. He was in my apartment. What? Who? Ethan, slow down. Eris's voice was sharp with concern. Did you call the police? The police can't do anything. He wasn't solid. I threw a book through him. He knew how insane it sounded. He could hear it in his own voice. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Ethan braced himself for disbelief, for the gentle suggestion that he see a doctor. The dirt, Eris said finally, her voice low. The files on the previous tenants. Several of them mentioned finding small piles of dirt or dead leaves in sealed rooms. The police reports always dismissed it as drafts or animals. Relief washed over Ethan so powerfully his knees felt weak. She believed him. Or at least, she was willing to entertain the impossible. He called himself and his people the Silent Choir. He said the house was a resonator. He said I was an offering. Okay, Eris said, her voice taking on a new, determined edge. Okay, this has gone beyond historical curiosity. This is something else. There's a woman I know. My grandmother used to consult with her. I always thought she was just a colorful local character.
A purveyor of folklore.
But maybe. Who is she? Ethan pleaded. Her name is Ilara. Most people just call her Mama Ilara. She lives out past the marshes, in the low country.
She's a root worker.
A Gullah Geechee practitioner.
Etanesatsank. A root worker. A witch doctor.
He traded a scientific problem for a supernatural one, and now he was being pointed toward folk magic. Eris, I need facts.
I need data. Not spell and charm.
Do you? Eris shot back, her voice like flint. Did your data stop a man from walking through your wall? Did your facts explain the dirt on your console? The history of this house is soaked in things that defy facts, Ethan. The Gullah Geechee have been on this coast for centuries. They have their own history, their own knowledge. It's a different kind of data, one that isn't written in books. Meet me at my office in an hour. We're going for a drive. The drive out of Savannah was like passing through a veil. The manicured squares and historic grandeur gave way to sprawling live oaks draped in Spanish moss, creating a Gothic canopy over the road. The air grew thick with the smell of salt marsh and pluff mud. Eris was quiet, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, her face set. They turned off the main highway onto a dirt road, the car bumping over ruts and roots. The road ended at a small, brightly colored cottage. It was painted a startling shade of sky blue, the color of a summer sky with no clouds. The porch ceiling was the same color, and hanging from the eaves were dozens of empty blue glass bottles, clinking softly in the breeze. A garden, chaotic but thriving, surrounded the house, filled with plants Ethan didn't recognize. An old woman sat on the porch in a rocking chair, shelling peas into a metal bowl. She was small and wizened, her face a beautiful roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes dark and incredibly bright. She wore a colorful head wrap and a simple cotton dress. She watched them pull up as if she'd been expecting them all day. Eris Thorne, the woman said, her voice raspy but strong. Been a long time since you brought your troubles out to the marsh. Mama Ilara, Eris said, getting out of the car. This is Ethan Hayes. He has a neighbor problem. Mama Ilara's bright eyes settled on Ethan. It felt less like a look and more like a physical assessment. She saw the exhaustion, the fear, the frantic intelligence churning behind his eyes. Neighbor problem, she repeated, her gaze unblinking. That house on Jones Street, the one with the blood brick. That ain't a neighbor problem. That's a hunger problem. And that house has been hungry a long, long time. Ethan felt a chill despite the humid air. You know the house. I know the kind of spiritual sickness that nests in a place like that, she said, setting her bowl of peas aside. And I know the ones who feed it. The choir. They ain't loud, but their silence screams. She patted the wicker chair beside her. See. Tell me what you seen. What you heard. For the next hour, Ethan recounted everything. The humming, the chanting, the whispers. The displaced orchid, Julian's impossible appearance, the dead soil. He showed her the baggie of dirt. Eris sat listening, her face a mask of horrified fascination. Mama Ilara listened without interruption. When he was finished, she took the baggie of dirt. She didn't open it. She just held it in her palm, her eyes closed. This ain't soil from any garden, she said finally. This is gopher dust. Graveyard dirt. But it's been corrupted. Soured. Mixed with something else.
Something cold.
She opened her eyes, and they were filled with a grim light. They ain't trying to scare you out, child. They're seasoning you. Marinating you in fear. That thing they serve, that hush, it likes its meals tender. The hush. Ethan asked.
Halting.
A hungry quiet. Not a ghost of a dead person. Something that is dead. The absence of life. The absence of sound. The choir thinks they can control it, make it do their bidding. Fools. You don't make a pet out of a hurricane. She stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the marsh. That wall in your house. That ain't just brick and mortar. It's a doorway. And every time they chant, every time they make you afraid, they knock on that door. Your fear is the key, just like that poor woman said years ago. When you're broken, when your spirit is hollowed out, they'll use that emptiness to pull the door wide open. What can I do? Ethan's voice was desperate.
He can't leave. He have nowhere else to go.
And I don't think they'd let me. No, they wouldn't. Mama Ilara agreed. You're part of the ritual now. Running won't save you. She turned back to him, her expression fierce. So you fight. You have a weapon you don't even know you have. You hear them. You truly hear them. That means you can learn to sing a different song. She went inside her cottage and returned a few moments later with a small bundle wrapped in red cloth. She handed it to Ethan. This is a start. Protection. He unwrapped it. Inside was a pouch of coarse blue powder, a small, gnarled piece of root, and a shard of mirror. That's crushed blue glass and brick dust, she explained, pointing to the powder. Haint blue. Spirits can't cross a line of it. Sprinkle it across your doorway and your windowsills. Every night. The root is High John the Conqueror root. Keep it in your pocket. It strengthens your spirit, makes it harder for them to get a grip on you. And the mirror, she tapped the shard. When you feel that fear coming on, when you hear the whispers, you look into this. You look at your own face and you speak your own name. Remind the world and yourself that you are still here. You are not a ghost yet. She then gave him a small jar filled with a dark, oily liquid. Fiery wall of protection oil. Anoint your doors and windows with it. And the wall. Put it on the wall itself. It won't stop them, not completely. But it will make them work for it. It will sour their ritual. It will fight their silence with your fire. Ethan looked at the collection of folk remedies. His scientific mind screamed in protest. Blue powder and a root against a man who could walk through walls? I know what you're thinking, Mama Ilara said, her eyes seeming to read his thoughts.
You think this is superstition nonsense.
But their power comes from belief. Their ritual is built on intention. You're not fighting a man, child. You're fighting a belief system. And you have to fight it with one of your own. Eris spoke up, her voice steady. The Gullah have been resisting powers far greater than Julian Croft for centuries, Ethan. Their beliefs are a shield, a weapon. Trust it. He looked from Eris's determined face to Mama Ilara's ancient, knowing eyes. He had nothing left to lose. He clutched the bundle tightly. Okay. That night, Ethan followed Mama Ilara's instructions with the meticulous precision of a scientist conducting an experiment. He sprinkled the line of haint blue powder across his front door sill. He anointed the window frames with the pungent, spicy oil. He pocketed the High John root, its gnarled texture a strange comfort. Finally, he approached the long brick wall, the jar of oil in his hand. As he touched the wall, he felt a jolt of static electricity, cold and sharp. The air grew heavy. From the other side, he heard a low, angry hiss, like 1,000 snakes. The humming started, not low and rhythmic, but jagged and furious. The wall vibrated with a palpable rage. They knew what he was doing. They could feel his defiance. He ignored the growing noise and the palpable malice. He dipped his fingers in the oil and began to draw on the wall. He didn't draw a symbol he knew. He let instinct guide him, his fingers tracing a complex spiraling pattern that seemed to push back against the oppressive energy of the bricks. The chanting from next door began, louder and more desperate than ever. But this time, something was different. The sound felt thin, strained. The fiery wall of protection oil was working. It was introducing noise into their perfect, sterile silence. It was like sonic feedback, corrupting their signal. A wave of dizziness washed over him. The room seemed to tilt, the shadows deepening in the corners. A voice screamed in his head, a voice of pure fury, speaking in that same guttural alien language. It was Julian's voice, stripped of its cultured veneer, raw and demonic. It promised him pain, madness, and an eternity of silence. Ethan staggered back, clutching his head. He fumbled in his pocket for the mirror shard. His hands were shaking violently. He held it up and stared into his own reflection. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. He looked like a ghost already. "My name is Ethan Hayes," he whispered, his voice trembling. The sound of his own name was a small flickering candle in an immense darkness. The furious voice in his head shrieked. A glass on his kitchen counter suddenly exploded, showering the floor with shards. "My name is Ethan Hayes," he said again, louder this time, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. He met his own terrified eyes in the mirror. "I am here. This is my space." A cold wind tore through the apartment, though the windows were sealed. It smelled of ozone and damp earth. The remaining petals on the dead orchid on his console crumbled to dust. "My name is Ethan Hayes," he roared, the sound tearing from his throat, raw and defiant. He poured all of his fear, his anger, his will to survive into those words. It was the loudest sound in the room. It was his sound. The instant he shouted, everything stopped. The humming, the chanting, the psychic pressure in his skull. All of it vanished. The silence that returned was not the heavy, listening silence from before. It was just quiet. A normal, empty quiet. He stood panting in the middle of his living room, the mirror shard clutched in his white-knuckled fist. He had fought back. He had screamed into the void, and for one night, the void had flinched. He knew this was only a temporary victory. He had only angered them. But for the first time since he'd moved in, he felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was a dangerous, defiant spark of hope. He had a shield. Now he needed a sword. And his sword was sound. And so, Ethan stands defiant in the oppressive quiet of his apartment. He has faced the impossible, stared into the face of a man who is not a man, and felt the chilling touch of a supernatural ritual that spans decades. Armed with the ancient wisdom of Mama Ilara and the desperate courage of a cornered man, he has done the one thing the silent choir never expected. He fought back. He didn't just resist their silence. He shattered it with a sound of his own, roaring his own name into the darkness as an act of war. The humming has stopped, the demonic chanting has ceased, but Ethan knows this is not the end. He has not won. He has merely survived the overture. The void has flinched, but it is still there, waiting on the other side of the wall. But for the first time, a spark of hope ignites within him. He was chosen for his ears, for his unique understanding of sound. They thought it was his vulnerability, but now he knows it is his greatest weapon. He has found a shield. Now he must forge a sword. What did you think of Ethan's terrifying ordeal in the silent choir? Let us know what you would have done in the comments below. Thank you for listening with us here on Horror Stories. If you enjoyed this tale, please show your support with a like, follow our channel, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, stay safe, and be careful what you listen for in the dark.